All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Culture Clinic. I'm joined here today by Kwesi. My name is Skay. I'm one of the founders here at Gusto. Kwesi, a quick introduction for yourself.
Hi, Kwesi Thomas. Big believer in culture, and so happy to talk to Skay kind of weekly about culture. Background: I've been in HR for a greater part of 20 years in companies like BlackBerry and Nortel and Shopify and Manulife, and I've been on my own helping companies grow and build culture for about 6 years now. So happy to share what experience I've been through.
Awesome. So, Culture Clinic, we're really here to just kind of answer questions that HR folks and people leaders have around building culture and more specifically kind of around recognition. Today's topic is centered around feedback. So we've gotten a number of kind of questions around just how to build a culture of feedback. Thought I lost you there, but you're still there. And so why don't we kick things off with just kind of a before we get into kind of like any of the questions here from audience members, what does it actually mean to create a culture of feedback? Like, what does that mean to you, Quace?
For me, it's a culture that, where at all levels and all directions, people are comfortable giving both positive and negative feedback. So you're able to tell people or to give people encouragement when they're doing something well. And you're also able to tell them, hey, when there's things that they could improve or things that you'd like to see that would help the team, serve them better. You're able to give that feedback. But to me, it looks like all directions all the time.
Right. And so feedback in my mind, and this is something that we focus a lot at Gusto on, is really kind of the fuel that helps companies move faster, right? And kind of solve problems, get better. If we're able to provide, get all of our people kind of providing honest feedback at a high clip, it's going to allow us to kind of just solve problems and get to the best ideas a lot faster.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a place where, aside from taking away all the noise of, people, conflicts, those types of issues, but having a place where people are actually helping each other get better all the time, must be able to move faster. And so for me, if you can, move away some of the noise and also help people work better and faster together, that type of culture, breeding ground for success, hopefully.
And contrast that for us with companies that are doing kind of annual performance reviews or some formal performance cycles.
Yeah, for me, if when we hear the word feedback, your immediate thought is we're doing annual performance reviews or we're doing quarterly objective setting and that's it. I think you've missed the mark entirely. Personally, it's just you've got to be able to get people working on a faster pace, giving each other both positive and constructive feedback. And so for me, that annual performance review cycle, et cetera, is great for setting a post in the ground annually and for doing bonus calculations, all the cool stuff that goes with it. But in terms of actually achieving a culture that's moving quickly and giving people the support they need to get better at their roles and move to the next roles and projects to go faster and all the other things that happen, you've got to be having a culture that's doing feedback on a much more frequent basis than annual or quarterly or something like that.
Yeah, I often think of the analogy of like a basketball team, right? And sure, they're watching tape in between games and whatnot, and you actually coach basketball, right? So this one works for you, but you'll see the players on the court kind of giving feedback in real time, like nonstop, right? And so, hey, you missed that pick, or you got to cut over here, you got to do that, and and during timeouts, the feedback cycle is just so fast. What's the other thing that I came across? I saw this on LinkedIn the other day where they ran an experiment with MBA students and a few other groups of like adults, but then kindergartners, and they challenged them to kind of like build a tower with marshmallows and spaghetti sticks. Have you seen this?
I haven't.
And the kindergartners like crushed the adults, like the MBA students, and like the MBA students were kind of strategizing and doing basically kind of like positioning for kind of like, who's in charge of the group and whatnot. And the kindergartners were just like, let's just get after it. And they started kind of, building stuff and giving each other feedback and figuring out kind of like what worked. And they ultimately were able to kind of like build higher towers than the MBA students.
I am surprised, but not surprised at the same time. But like you said, I coach 8 and 9-year-olds right now, or sorry, 9 and 10-year-olds right now. And so it's interesting because I just spent the last few weeks talking to them about talking to each other. It's easy to do it on timeouts and between games. But when I can get those kids on the court talking to each other in real time about what's happening and what they're seeing and helping each other and stuff like that, both good and bad. I especially spend a lot of time on the good. Yeah, sorry, looks like they're doing like a fire alarm test at the worst time possible in my building, but hopefully it doesn't happen often. But if I get,
we're live, so we can't edit it out.
I know it's just like, yeah, if we get people speaking and helping each other, both positive and negative, not negative, positive and constructive. Sorry, in real time, you got a team that's going to be moving a lot more quickly and a lot more seamlessly than those who are just getting feedback on a timeout, for example.
Okay. So we've kind of framed things up here a little bit. Let's dive into some of the questions here. First question from Neil. I want more feedback at my company, but I find a lot of our employees are hesitant to give honest feedback. How do I make them feel more comfortable doing this? I think it's a common challenge. So what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, as an HR team, we're going to build some processes and some tools in place. So we're going to build, some tools for the annual and the quarterly and for other feedback means. We might put recognition programs in place for positive. We might do lots of ways to programmatically get feedback happening. But I think that for me, the sort of secret sauce of what do you have to do, you've got to model it. And I think the more you can have both leaders, employees, people talking about the feedback that they're getting and giving, and people being comfortable doing that, and so people see the example happening, I think that's a huge sort of secret sauce to doing this, as well as talking about the skills openly in terms of giving feedback, so helping people learn how to do it. So I think if you're talking about how to do it and you're giving people examples that they can see of it happening at all levels and in all directions, I think if you do those two things, that kind of unlocks people's mind to doing it, and also using all those tools that we may have put in place to give feedback.
Cool. And I actually see another question further down here around some of the tools. So we'll kind of dig in a little bit on that. Around kind of making people feel comfortable, though, are there specific things that leaders can do, or HR people can help their leaders do, to make people feel safe and supported to provide feedback?
Well, the easy don't push back on people when they give you feedback, because you, as a leader, you do it once, they won't come back again, right? You take a very long time to earn that trust again. So, as much as you may not like the feedback you get, or you might not agree sometimes as a leader, you can disagree, you can give that, you can, etc. But you can't push back like, don't give me that feedback, because if you do that, oh my, okay, sorry everyone. But if as a leader, if you stop people from giving you feedback once or twice, it'll be very hard to build that back up. So that's like one big note, right? In terms of I think acknowledging when people give you feedback to the team and kind of talking openly, hey, X, Bob was so kind enough to give me feedback on this, and I'm, now working on trying to do that, makes it feel like, oh my gosh, somebody did this and it's okay. And they responded well and they took it to heart and it's actually helping. And so I think if you can give people a real example of yourself getting that feedback, and so you can show that it's okay, I think that helps people a lot. I know we all talk about open door and all those other policies, but I think if people hear and they see it happening, it's much more approachable than if they hear about a policy that sounds very, policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you touched on something there that I found to kind of work really well, is showing, well, I think you identified a few things here. One, accepting the feedback and showing people that you appreciate it, for sure. And in the moment, kind of just being accepting of whatever the feedback is. You don't have to kind of act on it. But I think shortly after receiving the feedback, communicating back with the person that provided it, whether you will be acting on it or not, and if not, why? Like, what is the logic or the thinking behind kind of going a different direction, right? And so the feedback might have to do with a project or something. It might have to do with your personal performance and whatnot. So being very clear with people when, and at an organizational level too, right? Like we think about like engagement surveys. And so we get all this feedback, but if we don't act on anything, people are going to stop caring and filling out the engagement surveys and making suggestions on what to do, because they're just kind of like, well, nothing's going to happen here, so it doesn't make a difference. So acting on the feedback is a critical piece.
Yeah, and letting people know. I guess, I mean, it sounds very top down, but letting people know that you're acting on it is important, so that they can see that it actually is happening, not just doing it in the background quietly. I think that's very top down in terms of how that sounds, but I agree with you completely. The more we can show that we're taking the feedback in, it's interesting. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about how to give feedback and how people how to giving that feedback. We don't talk a lot about receiving it. Like, how do you receive it? Like, how do you sit and have someone give you positive or constructive feedback, and what do you do with it? How do you respond to it? Right? I think for me that's hard for leaders. It's hard for anybody, period. But it's also hard for leaders, especially if it's coming from someone on their team. And so, for me, there's a couple things I do. I try not to respond in that meeting. My response might be an acknowledgement that I've heard and I've taken in, and I might parrot back what I think I've heard to make sure I understand the feedback. Try really hard not to actually respond to my reaction to the actual feedback and get defensive or too apologetic or too whatever. Like, I think every response might be too extreme. So taking that in, taking it, digesting it, thinking about it, understanding it, maybe seeking a couple other perspectives who might have been in that meeting, and then actually making an actual conscious decision about how I'm going to act on it, and then replying to the person. I think that's the safest way for me in my head in terms of how I would respond, how I like to receive feedback. I used to respond right away. That was probably really bad, especially when I was younger. And now, because I used to respond very fiery, but now I'm much better at, taking it in and then kind of going back to the person saying, okay, I actually understand. And here's what I think, and here's what I don't think.
And so you would advise HR teams to train people then on how to receive feedback. Like, that should be part of.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. And I see a question here. George Beckingham has chimed in on LinkedIn. As the company's safety guy, my challenge is exchanging effective feedback at multiple levels throughout multiple departments with different interpersonal dynamics. What do you have to say to George on this one? Kind of, you've worked at some large organizations and likely had to kind of disperse feedback to multiple kind of stakeholders.
I'm just reading the question slowly, make sure I answer. As a company safety guy, my challenge is exchanging. I mean, everybody loves the safety guy, first of all. Let's just point that out, right? Because they're usually telling us what we can and can't do and shouldn't be doing better. So it's always well received. So, George, you've got it.
I love just that George has got a helmet on in his in his profile photo here too.
Yeah, he's kind of letting you know straight up.
Yeah, it's good.
George, I mean, a couple things. One, I think the feedback for me is like, strip away the actual people for a second. If the feedback is about the top of the content, like the issue, the safety issue, whatever that is, and that's where the feedback is, I think you have to strip away a bit of the personality. I know it's hard to do, but the reason I say that is because your feedback shouldn't be about Bob. It should be about what Bob did or is doing, not Bob as a person. And so I think you kind of take that away for a second. The level is the one, I guess from my own career, I think how you present things to anyone, regardless of their level, is how I personally work and live. Should be regardless of their level, should be honest and kind. And so if you're being, if that feedback is for the CEO or for, someone in customer support, it shouldn't matter to me. It should be honest. It should be, well thought out and be there to help them. And so I think if you do those two things, not everyone's going to receive everything well. Not everyone will respond well, but I think you've done your part to do those, to give the feedback in the best way you could. And you can be, proud of that feedback. Right. And I think if you've done that, I don't know, some CEOs, I don't know too many CEOs that walk around going, hey, you're fired for giving me feedback, except for that Elon Musk thing that was on Twitter the other day. But everything else, I think you're okay.
I just Googled something here really quick. I'd read the Netflix book, No Rules Rules, and they've got a really strong culture of feedback there. And so they've got this framework called the 4 A's. So
Keep going.
so they've got this framework of the 4 A's for providing feedback at Netflix. Aim to assist. So essentially coming from a place of when I'm wanting to provide feedback to somebody, wanting to help them, right? I'm not providing feedback to kind of come down on you. It's coming from a place of like, hey, how do I help you get better? Making the feedback actionable. And so it's not kind of vague and just, oh, you know, sucked at this thing, or hey, great job. Like feedback doesn't necessarily need to be kind of always bad, right? Like feedback, kind of the word feedback in itself has a bit of a kind of like a negative connotation to it. Like it's always going to be, but feedback can definitely be positive, and we see that kind of with recognition. But it should be kind of actionable, right? If it is kind of constructive. And then appreciate is the third one. And so I think what they're saying there is the person receiving the feedback needs to demonstrate that they appreciate getting the feedback, right? And then the fourth one is around accepting or discarding the feedback. And so again, you don't have, like, I think we can encourage people to provide feedback to us, but communicating that, hey, we're not always going to accept and act on your feedback. We will take it in and consider kind of what to do with that feedback and let you know kind of whether we will or not. But I think that's a good model, kind of the 4 A's there from Netflix.
Yeah, I touched on some really, really, really good points, right? I think appreciate, like I said, recognizing that you want the feedback is important. Deciding what to do with the feedback is a separate topic, right? And I think if people are honestly looking for feedback, constructive or positive, then they shouldn't hold it against you. They should be appreciative of the actual feedback.
Right? Totally.
I want to touch on something really quick you just said. It's really, feedback does have that sort of, especially when it comes to work, it has that sort of like constructive, like there's something they were trying to improve or fix. But as much as we do that, you have to do the feedback on positive. I think nothing, for me, I'll go back to my kids with the basketball for a second. If I don't tell them good job, if I only tell them that's a horrible layup, you need to fix your layup, that's you fix your layup, they won't know what a good layup looks like. I got to tell them that's a good layup. Good job. That's, keep doing that layup, for them to actually understand what they should do as well. So I think you've got to be able to do both. Give feedback, but you've got to encourage people as well in terms of giving them feedback when they're doing things well.
And I think that this will probably come up a little bit later. I see some other questions around this, but recognition and praise and positive feedback provides the space and trust to then give constructive feedback. Because if I'm only coming down on you all the time, it's just going to be such a negative relationship, right? And so just establishing kind of that, hey, I see all these great things that you're doing, and over here, or when the time comes that I need to kind of provide constructive feedback, the person doesn't feel like you're blind to all of the good things they're doing. And I think I saw something, and it was in the leadership training that we did with our team. I'm blanking on the book. Was it Time to Think, where she talked about a ratio of kind of 5 to 1. So 5 pieces of recognition to 1 piece of kind of constructive feedback as what most people are kind of accepting of. And so it's important to kind of layer in the positive pieces.
I don't think it was Time to Think, but I cannot remember which reference it was now. But you are right. We did talk about that quite a bit on that training. But and for me, that you're right. That feedback gives you the ability to give people constructive feedback, right? As leaders, I think there are 2 types of leaders, or 2 styles of leadership. You can lead because you've been given a title and someone bestowed you. You are now, manager, and they've given you the, bestowed on you. That's important. Not saying it's not, but there's also manager who goes, I've earned this. I've earned that place. In our relationship, I've shown you that I'm a good leader. I've shown you I've listened. I'm sure I've got feedback. I think for me, being able to accept and give feedback as a leader in a right, healthy way, it's a different type of relationship. You've gone from just like, oh yeah, this person's been titled my boss or my boss, to this person's my boss. but I respect them because I want to work for them and give them the best I can because of how they work with me. I think feedback in those areas.
Okay, let's dive into a few more questions here. This is great. Enjoying this conversation. Touch briefly on this, but what tools can I create, or what tools can I use to create a culture of feedback? And so, yeah, let me just pass it over to you there.
Don't remember this question. I'm trying to think. I'm going to put some of the table stakes right. Your annual performance and goal setting and review cycles, etc. There are many tools out there that will do that, and you should be doing those. I by no means discourage people from doing them. I personally think annual is too long a cycle in this current modern world, but there are tools that'll do that for you. There are. I'm blanking on some of these recognitions. There are lots of tools. I won't name some of the clearly obvious recognition tools that are able to use, but there are definitely some positive ones. On the constructive side, for me, that's building it into your culture. Whatever you're using for your one-on-ones, whatever you're using to help people record or to guide them through their one-on-ones. Some people using tools. Some is just like an open do your one-on-ones. I think building in that feedback session or that feedback time, for both directions, both to the employee as well as to the leader. In the one-on-one, I think that's important. I think that's whether you're using a tool to do that or you're using paper and pencil, build that into that process. I think is an important one.
Okay. And yeah, you did touch on kind of recognition in there. We're obviously kind of biased on this, but having a tool for your people to provide consistent recognition kind of can build that kind of culture of positive feedback and again kind of allow the airspace or the air cover there to then provide constructive feedback when required. Have you seen success? We've got some tools internally here where like digital tools to provide constructive feedback. Like my feeling on this is that it's been way more effective to provide constructive feedback in a one-on-one environment or in a conversation, because there's so much lost in tone. So, thinking about kind of like Lattice, right? And they've got kind of an area there that I can kind of provide feedback to colleagues, and I hesitate to use it.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think feedback is such a broad word. I think there, in terms of actual feedback, what I want on something there's action or there is performance or anything like that. I think conversation is. I think there's too much lost in digital tools. I agree with you there. If there is just feedback needed on just like I just want to collect feedback on, was this report helpful or not? I get some of these tools or some of these, was this meeting helpful or not, right? I get some of those statistical tools or tools being able to help with those,
okay.
but it's not the same. It's a different level of feedback, right? For example, I had a leader once who wanted to get meetings. He wanted to get meetings better. So at the end of every meeting, we rated how good or bad that meeting was and gave feedback on that meeting. I could see a tool being used for that, because taking 7 executives time to get poll on feedback might be expensive and not useful. But having everyone just a quick poll after going, that meeting was a 7 out of 10, and I think we wasted too much time on blah, or we should have gotten deeper onto blah. I see those tools being helpful in that space.
I love that example though of the leader requesting feedback on a regular cadence for whatever it is, whether it's a meeting or whether it's a project that you're working on or whatnot. But just building that into kind of the way that you work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I've kind of adopted some of his thinking on this. If the executive team is there to think and make decisions, then we should be practicing getting better at thinking and making decisions. And meetings are one of those things. It's a very costly meeting to have everyone in that meeting. So let's get good at having good quality meetings. And so I think feedback again in that setting was used to better the team's quality of meetings. But I think it was important.
Okay, awesome. Got a question here from Jill. It's difficult to give feedback to leaders. How do I do this effectively? So providing feedback up.
It's hard. It feels like a little like you're walking out on the ledge a bit, right? But I do think our cultures have advanced so much that in terms of how workplaces work, that you can actually give people honest feedback. Now, again, I think back to what I said to George earlier, ensuring that it is not about the person and it's about what the topic that needs to be, the feedback needs to be given, is important. So you're not going, hey, you always yell at me when I do this. Hey, I don't, let's talk about what we're actually giving feedback on and not the person per se. I think is important. And number two, I think you've got to give positive feedback as well. Your leader also wants to hear when they've done a good job, or that was a good meeting, or that was a good whatever it is, right? And I think if you can give that positive and constructive feedback to your leaders, they'll actually become more open to it. And a lot of people think it's only when the leaders have done something that we want to stop them from doing or fix that, or I don't like when they do this. But when they do positive things, they are people too, and they are employees as well, or whatever they are. They want to hear that feedback as well when they're doing the things right that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. As we kind of lead the company here at Gusto, occasionally I'll get an employee that kind of recognizes me for something, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of nice. Like, I feel good about that. And I don't know. I don't expect employees to do it. But when it does happen, it does feel nice. George has another tip here for us. Thanks for all the comments, George. Quick feedback I request at the end of a training course. Number 1, tell me something you learned that you didn't know before. Number 2, did this session keep your attention? Number 3, how much of this are you going to use in your work? I love that. Or similar based on topic. 3 questions, quick and easy to do. Yeah, that's great. So kind of at the end of any sort of training course, requesting feedback in real time, and not waiting, right? So much of feedback, and we see this kind of with recognition as well, like it's so much more impactful if it's timely, right? And it's so much easier. Like if I ask you, Kwesi, kind of like at the end of the month, to recognize somebody on the team for something they did, you're in this kind of moment of like, oh shit, like what happened over the last month?
Correct.
But if when things are happening in real time, you provide that that feedback in real time, that recognition in real time, it's easier for you to do because you just experienced whatever it was, and we're able to kind of, and then it's so much more impactful for the person receiving it, right? Because they're like, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of connect the dots there. That just happened, versus the annual performance review, or even kind of quarterly performance reviews. You're reflecting on kind of stuff that happened 2-3 months ago, and missing a little bit of kind of the context.
And I think that happens both with positive and the constructive feedback. Imagine, and I think that's why a lot of the constructive stuff gets left off the table. Imagine going back 2-3 months or a year afterwards, be like, oh yeah, back in January, I forgot to tell you that you needed to, this XYZ happened, and we thought you should have done XYZ. You got to do both on a very timely basis for it to work. And I think feedback, especially recognition, as well as constructive feedback, the closer you can get it to the action, the action that you're talking about, the better. Sometimes it may not be the moment, like right when I lost that basketball game. Do not come and tell me I could have coached the team better. Tell me tomorrow. But similarly, I think within work, if someone's worked their butt off on a meeting, didn't go as well, that 5 minutes after the meeting might not be the best time to give them that feedback. You might need to come back to them the day after when they've had a chance to decompress. But I think giving feedback on as close as you can to the action that's reasonably the right moment is important.
And that kind of ties into kind of like public private as well, right? And not wanting to kind of criticize people in public, and so like unless the feedback could really help them. So imagine they're kind of like doing a presentation, and what was the example that they gave? They weren't kind of addressing the concern, or they were losing the audience for some reason. And somebody in the audience kind of puts their hand up and kind of provides feedback to the presenter in real time. Like, hey, I think this group might be more interested in kind of this part of the discussion. We're a little bit off topic. That sort of real-time feedback could save the whole presentation rather than allowing them to kind of like go through the whole thing. But in general, saving kind of constructive feedback for private conversations is kind of the rule of thumb.
Yeah, I think for me, if the feedback is going to be embarrassing, or could be received in a way that kind of feels the person's been, um, uh, criticized in front of everyone unduly. I think I agree with you. Privately is probably the best. Um, I do think though, once you get a culture of feedback, a truly hubbing in an organization, people are looking for it. They're looking to figure out what they can do and what they can do, because what they can do better. They don't want to waste an hour in a meeting when the first 15 minutes have thrown them off. They'd rather be, of course, corrected and spend the 45 minutes left on the right direction. And so, how you give that feedback, as well as the person's willingness to receive that feedback, is important. But as you develop a culture of recognition, for me, I think you get to a point where it's okay to kind of have those discussions. Again, I'm not talking about embarrassing someone or like coming at doing something but giving feedback on a work topic that is constructive, or to the team that is sitting in a meeting. I think when you get to a place where that trust is built and everybody kind of understands this is all to make us better, then all for it personally.
And it comes back to kind of those 4 A's, right? So like just aiming to assist and being kind of actionable with the feedback, right? So in the moment, to kind of tie up the previous question though, around kind of providing feedback to leaders, right? Like we talked about kind of like recognizing leaders there goes a long way. And I think this will kind of tie into our next question nicely, but asking the leaders how they like to receive feedback. Correct. Right. And like if they haven't already done this, and I think good leaders should do this already, and HR teams should help their leaders kind of do this and provide manuals or how I work guides. So, hi, I'm Skay, and this is, how I like to work. This is how I like to receive feedback. This is how I like to communicate, and making that kind of clear to your team. But if you as an individual haven't received that from your leader, just asking them outright, like, hey, how do you like to receive feedback, so that when I see something and I want to help you get better, because if they tell you that they want to receive feedback a certain way and then you execute on that for them, if they get upset about that, you can go back to them and just say, hey, I thought we discussed this. This is what you told me you wanted. How else would you like me to deliver feedback? And again, I'm just coming from a place of service.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think if people know what's to be expected and they can execute on it, then it makes it a lot easier. You're still stepping out on a branch, no matter how you, in your heart of hearts, you're just like, still going to go up and tell my boss about something that I would like them to change. It's still going to be a bit of a leap, but I think as leaders, the more safe we can make our team feel to have those conversations, the more productive our teams will be. I said it earlier, I would reinforce, because for me, it's personally one of the big ones. If in your one-on-ones, there is that time for feedback that's programmed, like you're going to do it as a leader, and you do that often, then that muscle of giving feedback and actually asking for it, and your employee really, oh, this person actually wants my feedback and is asking for it. If that happens often enough, then that muscle gets stronger and stronger than the once or twice or quarterly that we'll do it, right? And so I think for me, the more we can make that feedback muscle work in both directions, the more comfortable giving your leader feedback will be.
Cool. So next question, I think this will kind of tie nicely together, but how do we deal with people at my company that are more sensitive and defensive about negative feedback than others?
I thought I got away from this alarm. How do we feel about it's a hard question. It has a lot to do with how the culture the team is surrounded with. Sorry, guys, and everyone on the broadcast. I'm really sorry. I just lost my train of thought. I think this is a hard question to answer, because I think you'd only do your best in terms of how you give the feedback, and if you can be honest with people and give them. We've talked about it several times, I think, that on the call, but giving people feedback, not only when it's constructive, but when there's other reasons to give them feedback, I think gives you that that leeway to give constructive feedback. But I think you have to approach people in an honest manner, in like a genuine manner. I mean, let's be very honest about the feedback, and make sure that you've given it as kindly as you can, right? And I say kind not to be soft, not to be beating around the bush. I mean kind as in you weren't going after someone's feelings. You weren't trying to hurt them. You weren't trying to make them feel a certain way. You were trying to help them get better. That's what I mean by kind. And so if we do that, hopefully it'll be received as best as possible. But some people, there's always gonna be some people who just don't want to hear it. But do your best, right?
Totally. And I think as humans too, right? It's kind of just built into us, right? To be kind of defensive when we feel like we're being kind of attacked, right? But if I can kind of like build on some of your ideas from earlier, companies don't spend enough time training people how to receive feedback, right? And both managers, but individual contributors as well. Like if we want to build a culture of feedback, let's talk about that as an organization. Let's talk about how to kind of receive feedback, and that kind of comes down to demonstrating that you appreciate the feedback and that you will either accept it or discard it, and kind of communicate, back to the person that provided the feedback that, whether or not you're going to act on it. But another piece here, and it kind of ties into the previous comment, is around the individuality of people and how they like to receive feedback. And so asking them, so individual contributors, how do you like to receive feedback? Because they might prefer not to receive it in the form of a conversation because it might make them feel kind of uncomfortable or whatnot. Or maybe it's and you don't want to type it out. So maybe you send a video message or a voice memo so that you can kind of communicate some of the tone there. But asking your people how they like to receive feedback, and then respecting that and delivering the feedback in a way that works for them.
You're bang on, right? I think if you build those things together, you've got a good recipe. I agree with asking people how they like to receive my feedback. The only answer I'm not sure I personally struggle with and actually wouldn't do is if you said I want it written. That send me, because you lose so much of that communication when it's just a written whatever it is. Seems very, I don't know, for me it loses a lot of the context. I'm not talking about, again, not referring to PIPs, performance improvement plans, or like annual reviews, those types of things, or 360 feedback, that type of work. I'm just talking about your ongoing daily sort of like work and how you're getting feedback on a consistent manner. I feel once you've gotten to the point of putting it down on paper and having to send you an email, it becomes very formal. It becomes very much more like another level of feedback.
Right. And so there is a place for kind of those quarterly, biannual, annual performance cycles and the feedback that is kind of written there. But to really build that culture of feedback, you want to make it a little bit more casual and kind of real time, people on the basketball court kind of talking back and forth and just, hey, saw this thing, you can get better. Didn't want to hold it back for a few months and just thought it would help you. Go.
Yeah. Imagine doing presentations for a year, getting no feedback, realizing that, you could have changed, I don't know, the word every 2 seconds or something like that, and getting feedback once a year on that. Well, you've just done 30 presentations this year. You could have probably gotten better at presentation 5 or 6, which, and had the rest of the year getting better. I think, to me, that's why feedback, I don't forget, feedback in general, I think, can be much more often. Though, again, there is definitely a place for your annual and quarterly cycles and stuff like that is important. But genuine, ongoing kids on the basketball court feedback is important.
Let's talk about cycles here very quickly, because we've tested a bunch of different cadences. What have you seen kind of be the most effective kind of cadence for performance review cycles for feedback?
Annual is a big traditional one that sort of, to me, it's kind of like the floor. You have to at least do that. I think if you get to a quarterly cycle, but that quarterly cycle has to be light enough that doesn't get in the way of the actual work, and that's hard to do, right? As HR people, we love putting out processes and things that the company has to do, and sometimes that gets in the way of the everyday. I've got to sell the widgets, I've got to close the books, I've got to actually exit, I've got to deliver, I've got to ship from the warehouse, and so if you can get the cycle, light and fast enough to be done quarterly, amazing, right?
And so what we've experimented with and are starting to have a lot of success with, that I'd encourage our audience to try, is rather than doing kind of 360 reviews quarterly, splitting out that 360 review across the entire year. So currently in Q4, we're doing kind of an executive feedback cycle. So our entire team can provide the executive leadership team with feedback. In Q1, we're going to be doing self assessment, and then managers will be going kind of over that feedback with individuals. In Q2, I believe we're doing kind of peer-to-peer feedback. And then Q3, we're going to be doing kind of manager and employee kind of feedback up and down. So kind of splitting out that 360 review cycle. Because what we found was doing an entire 360 review cycle was that as the manager kind of delivering the feedback, right? So we get all of the comments in Lattice, and then the manager will sit down and kind of deliver all the feedback. The peers, the manager, the self-assessment, they all had similar themes throughout them, right? And so we were kind of like repeating ourselves throughout, like the ROI on having everybody do it at once was marginal versus kind of like splitting it out across the year and allowing for all of those pieces to kind of have a play, but it really lightens the lift on each kind of quarterly. So there's consistent feedback throughout the year, but the actual lift is very light.
That's awesome. That's an awesome idea. I have not seen that before. Curious to see how it plays out, but it's an awesome idea. I think it might be very interesting to getting the different perspectives throughout the year as the calendar rolls on versus once a year, some big set of feedback.
Yeah, it's been kind of a little bit of iterating, kind of trying to find what time of the year makes the most sense for different parts of the cycle. But we've landed in a nice spot, and the feedback on the feedback to get that on has been going well. Time for one more question here from Carl. I often feel like employees pay more attention to negative feedback than positive feedback. How do I make sure that positive feedback actually has an impact and reinforces behavior?
A, do it often. B, to be very frank, I think the positive ones, especially the milestone, like when somebody's really accomplished something, and you want to give them some positive feedback, try to mark it with something. Try to mark that event with something, whether that is Shelly, who actually does the other podcast, she and I have known each other for a long time. She reminds me, like, she knitted a sweater for my firstborn when he was born and my second. Can't remember, but she marked those two events in my life with that sweater. So they're 14 and 8, and I still remember them to this day, right? Mark that. It doesn't mean you have to knit sweaters for everyone, but mark that event, whether that is through a tool, whether that is through coffee, whatever it is, mark that event, I think, is a big one in terms of recognizing people well. And two, and I hate saying it this way, don't give out BS small points for something. Like, just don't waste time giving out something that does not make sense for what the accomplishment is. It actually takes away from it. So, I've seen a lot of people, say, okay, great, I'll put it in any one of the recognition tools, and then I'll give them 15 points towards a toaster that I can't get for 4 years. Don't waste your time with that shit. Actually recognize people and market with something that makes sense, right?
So if you're going to do the recognition and there's not substantial budget there, it's better to do a non-monetary, like just focus on the recognition piece itself, the message, the letter, the card. And if there is a monetary component, it needs to have a significant value to it.
It has to have a value that's relative to what you're recognizing, right? Thank you for saving the company $4 million. Here is enough to go get a coffee at Starbucks. Does not make sense, right? And so I'm not like, just make sure it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, ask for the budget or don't use that. Like, recognize I try to mark the event with something that makes sense.
And we see this all the time with recognition programs where there's typically a limited budget when they start, and they want to run a peer-to-peer program right out of the gate. And so they take their limited budget and they spread it across all their employees, and everybody gets $3 or $4 a month to kind of hand out. And then they split that among the pieces of recognition that they send out throughout the month. And it's like, hey, here's 65 cents for working all weekend or really crushing it to kind of help me on this thing. And it just doesn't, like, it's almost insulting when you kind of when you attach the little amount of points to that. So it's better to make those programs completely non-monetary, concentrate the budgets, and then kind of run some draws or prizes or whatnot that have like a meaningful amount to it, right? Like, here's a $25 gift card or whatnot for the winner of the draw, and we're highlighting that recognition. But the program itself is completely non-monetary.
Yeah, giving positive feedback, recognition, right, is as important as the constructive feedback. And don't get, I think, distracting by, what I would say insulting amounts of reward. It's called reward. If the reward does not make sense, it just takes away from the recognition that we're trying to accomplish, right? And so let's make sure the recognition is appropriate and the feedback is appropriate, and then recognize, do draws, do whatever else. But I think in your peer-to-peer programs, those programs that may not be hard to get funding, I actually think it's just a slow walk to a death of a program. If you've underfunded or spread out the budget too small, it's just how long before people say this is not effective, and we're just doing it because we're doing it. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of appropriately rewarding for the recognition that you're doing.
And
by the way, same thing on negative scale. Same thing. If someone had a bad meeting, you don't want to go out there with a club and start whacking them over the head too much. Give them the feedback, but be appropriate with the feedback as well.
Right. Yeah. One eye kind of on the time here. We're kind of getting time to kind of wrap up. So why don't we kind of try to summarize here some of the takeaways? So I heard very early on in the discussion the kind of importance to kind of build feedback into kind of one-on-one. So helping our leaders, just asking for feedback in those one-on-ones, demonstrating that they appreciate kind of the feedback, that they're acting on the feedback. We talked about the individuality of feedback, right? And making sure that we're kind of asking both managers and individual contributors asking managers and individual contributors how they like to receive feedback, and then respecting that. And then we talked about the 4 A's there. So aiming to assist when giving feedback, coming from a place of just trying to help, making the feedback actionable for those receiving the feedback, like demonstrating they appreciate it, and then accepting or discarding the feedback. And so kind of letting the person know whether you're going to act on it or not. We talked a little bit about kind of performance cycles there towards the end, and making sure that the lift on performance reviews and feedback cycles is not kind of interfering with work, but also not kind of keeping them to kind of an annual cadence where you're not getting the feedback at all. Any major kind of takeaway that you'd like to kind of leave the audience with?
Only thing I'd add is let's not make it some big ominous scary thing. Make feedback a part of what happens on a regular basis. For me, if you start to see people asking for feedback on a regular basis, like your teams are asking each other or your leaders for feedback, then you're probably on the right path. I tried to catch that alarm that time. Then you're probably on that right path, right? And so, make it a regular thing, positive and constructive.
Awesome. Yeah, kind of that concept of air cover, right? And so to build trust with people, you need to recognize the good things that they're doing in order to have permission to provide kind of constructive feedback.
True.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you're keen and kind of connecting with Kwesi and myself, you can find us on LinkedIn. If you have questions that you'd like us to kind of tackle in future Culture Clinic episodes, feel free to kind of DM us there. And if you'd like to see more kind of helpful videos around kind of culture and whatnot, check out our YouTube channel, just Gusto, Guusto. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week, everybody.